Whoever the next president is, he or she will likely be dealt a heavy hand navigating the financial and geopolitical woes facing America. Speaking with The Economist, JPMorgan Chase boss Jamie Dimon expressed having concern over another Trump presidency. Let's watch.
I would worry about another Trump presidency too, by the way, but I think there's always been an isolation element. It took a lot to get us into World War I. It took a lot to get us to World War II. But I think if you go to Washington, D.C., when it comes to Ukraine, it's been pretty tight. Republicans and Democrats. So when it was needed, it was there. And I think the other thing we have to explain to the American public is we're doing it for America. So of course you have America first, meaning, can you imagine someone running for president saying America second? But we're doing this for America. If America gets isolated, if autocratic nations kind of cherry pick the world on security and food and economics and development finance, the Chinese are all over Latin America, which they are, in Africa, and we're not there. That's a huge mistake for America. So the America should be doing this for itself. We have to explain to the American public why it's important.
Dimon's comments come a month after the so-called Wall Street king put rumors of making a presidential run to rest. Now, friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, weighed in on that particular clip, pointing out that he calls him Obama's favorite banker, says in response to the British interviewer's question that he also worries about Trump's refusal to involve the U.S. in more wars, but says, fortunately, as Ukraine shows, the bipartisan D.C. class doesn't share Trump's sentiment. So kind of openly complaining that the consequence of a Trump presidency might be less U.S. involvement in war. It seems like an unintentional endorsement, frankly, of Trump as president to a lot of folks.
It's no surprise that he doesn't want another Trump term, given his comments there about Ukraine, which, he tries to frame this as vitally important to America, to U.S. interests, that the border of Ukraine not be drawn slightly further to the east than it is now. Do people agree that this is a vital, pivotal U.S. security issue, that Ukraine not cede some territory that has a lot of Russian-speaking, historically Russian-connected people, who many of which don't wish to be part of Ukraine, that they remain part of the country of Ukraine? That is a top U.S. goal in Jamie Dimon's. That is putting America first, is spending billions of dollars to help arm the campaign to keep that territory under the Zelensky regime, a regime that has, had to censor the press and do all sorts of illiberal things in the midst of this war effort. I don't agree with that. I don't think a lot of the American people agree with that, but that is his perspective.
Yeah, it's an odd shift that's happening. I don't know that I've ever seen a liberal acknowledge that there is a kind of sentiment behind America first, where Americans that are struggling are concerned about whether or not their interests are going to be subjugated to the interests of some foreign policy goal, some imperialist goal, et cetera. There is some aspect of the American first discourse that can be a kind of tongue-in-cheek, wink, nod for a aspects of some conservative ideology that I don't personally support. But there also is, I think, some good faith investment in people just being concerned as they see money going out the door and none of it is coming their way. And so it is interesting to see a Democrat sort of wrestle with, well, is there a good faith interest in American first that's not just this kind of, white supremacist or white nationalist or whatever gloss that often gets put on that framing. Well, but then for him to turn and say, well, this is American first. Foreign adventurism is putting American first. Yeah. Because if we don't show our strength abroad, if we don't compete with Russia and China and Africa militarily, then when people come and attack us later on, we won't have global dominance from a military perspective or an economic perspective, which is kind of is saying the quiet part out loud, but also ignores that the way that countries like China have been exerting so much influence in places like Africa is through also infrastructure development and offering favorable trade agreements that actually help those countries from an economic perspective to grow. We see the emergence of BRICS as a global power and the prospective addition of new people to that particular alliance and the effort to get off of the Western European dominated economic system, at least with respect to commodities, economies, they've demonstrated an incredible ability to decouple themselves from the dollar. So Jamie Dimon saying the quiet part out loud, which is the only way we can get people to keep playing ball with us, because frankly, we've been extractive, unfair. We've applied sanctions to people who don't want to adopt an economic policy that advantages us as a country, is to use our military might. That's terrifying, and it is extraordinary that this reporter didn't push back in any way.
Yeah, it's also telling how he Jamie Dimon invokes, past conflicts. Okay, I think most people think World War II had some fairly existential stakes and that it was proper to become involved. I don't think that's a particularly controversial opinion.
Also, we were bombed.
We were attacked.
So,
World War I, this is, again, a territorial dispute in Europe that a horrific casualty, the trench warfare, just absolutely awful, anyone who went through it. I'm not sure. There is an isolationist case for World War I involvement, so I don't want to just let him get away with saying, oh yeah, it's how dare there were people dragging their feet about the U.S. getting involved in this really horrific conflagration again over like the boundaries in Europe.
Yeah.
Is odd. Let's not just kind of lump that in with World War II. Like there were no Nazis back then. There was we weren't attacked, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that Jamie Dimon, he had floated, it was floated that he could be a presidential candidate.
But it was floated by who? By him? I don't know.
Well, I think that generally speaking, these kinds of articles aren't written in a vacuum.
When he announced, you know what, I don't think I'm going to run for president, I was like, well, who asked? That would be like me doing it. I know everybody's out there demanding that Robby Soave run for president, but I'm not going to deign to put the crown upon my head.
Well, no, I think there are a lot of people that very much think that billionaires are smart and good and better than the rest of us. A lot of people feel that way about Elon Musk. If he were born in America, I think there would be calls for him to run for president. And that he, as someone who is known as the liberals' favorite banker, the good guy among the bankers, I've heard people describe him in that way, Obama's favorite banker, that he could help right America. For the same reason that to some folks, Bloomberg offered an appeal. And he also offered an appeal as a safety raft if something happened to Joe Biden, because of his age or whatnot in 2020. There was some concern that Bernie Sanders, who wanted very much to tax billionaires and to rein in Wall Street, was not a good option for someone like Bloomberg or Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon was the focus specifically of a lot of Bernie's, at least one Bernie kind of attack ad sort of thing, a critical video. And that they provide that kind of stopgap function because they have their own money and can do an independent run that saves America from somebody who's a genuine populist. That being said, I only brought that up to point out that he is heading a bank that is currently involved in a lawsuit about its facilitating of Jeffrey Epstein's financial transactions that enabled him to have this mass ring of grooming and sexual exploitation of minor women. So it is, I think, the height of hubris for him to think that he belongs in the political sphere in the least.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.